Asalaamu Alaikum. Greetings of peace. My name is Safir Ahmed, and I want to welcome all of you on behalf of Zaytuna College. Not just to those of you who are in this room, but we also have a large audience watching us through live stream, so welcome to all of you as well, across the country and across the globe. We believe we have an enlightening and inspirational program tonight that's centered around the work of the 13th century Sufi poet, scholar, and theologian. But before we get started, I want to let you all know about two other events that are coming up soon at Zaytuna College, and those of you who might be interested in those. One is on March 17th. It's a Saturday, March 17th. We have an event hosted by Renovatio, which is the new journal of Zaytuna College. I have a handy copy here, and it's available at the bookstore as well. This is a journal of Zaytuna College, and it's featuring three scholars who have written for this issue of the new issue of the journal. And the three scholars are Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, the president of Zaytuna College, Maria De Cake. She teaches at George Mason University, and she also was one of the editors of the Study Quran. And she also wrote an article in this journal about the Quran and its view of Jews and Christians. And we also have Andrew March. He has been a professor at Yale for about 10 years, and now he currently is at Harvard. And he wrote an article on this issue for us about Islam and how it looks at atheism and disbelief in the discourse of tolerance within the Islamic tradition. So that is a event on Saturday, March 17th, right here in this room, and it's free and open. It will be live streamed. The title of the event is Islam and the Question of Pluralism. I urge you all to buy a copy of Renovatio, read the articles. If not, you can go online as well to renovatio.zaytuna.edu and read the articles. I also want to let you know if you haven't yet checked out, there's a bookstore across the hall. It's an amazing bookstore. We have the unique thing about our bookstore is that all the books and the gifts that are in there are hand selected by our scholars and the owner of the bookstore, who is Khadija O'Connell. She's an amazing person with a great aesthetic sense. And all our books are selected by our scholars. So it's not just every book that's out there, it's just hand-selected books that we think are important books that people ought to read. For those of you watching online, you can also buy everything at the bookstore. Books, gifts, everything online, and you just go to bookstore.zaytuna.edu. Those are public service announcements, not commercials. Here comes a commercial. For those of you in the San Francisco Bay Area, we have an event this Sunday. It's an annual benefit dinner for Zaytuna College that takes place once a year. It's Sunday evening at the Santa Clara Marriott, and it will feature our president, Hamza Yusuf. It'll feature Imam Zaid Shakir, who's a board member and a faculty person, and our provost, Dr. Hatem Bazian. So that event is taking place on Sunday, and tickets, I believe, are going out fast, but there's somebody out in the hallway who can sell you tickets. If you want to get them, they will not be available at the door. So that's my commercial. Now on to tonight's program. I want to first tell you how this event came about. About a month ago or so, I had a conversation on some other matters with Professor Omid Safi at Duke University. And he said he was going to be in the Bay Area, and he suggested that we might do something. And this is, of course, a Rumi and his life and his work falls into his expertise area, and also has a passion for him. So he proposed this, and so he has graciously agreed to come here and do this event for us tonight. And his talk is, of course, as the title you may have seen, Rumi and the Path of Divine Love. But then we decided to add another speaker to this, and somebody from the Bay Area. Some of you, or most of you, may know him already. That's Feraidoon Mojadedi, and I will introduce him later. The format for the program tonight is very simple. I will, in a minute or so, introduce Omid Safi. He will give a talk, and then after his talk, he will sit down, and I'll introduce Feraidoon, and he'll join Omid Safi, and they will have a conversation for the second half of the program. And if we have time left, hopefully we will, we'll take some questions from the audience. There's a microphone here for those in the audience to come up and ask questions, but Feraidoon will let you know if that happens. So on to our first guest speaker. Omid Safi is, as you know, the director of the Duke Islamic Studies Center at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. He's a professor of Islamic Studies, and he has served as a chair for the Islamic Mysticism Group at the American Academy of Religion. Omid is also the author of Memories of Muhammad, an award-winning biography of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of God upon him. His next book, Radical Love, Teachings from the Islamic Mystical Tradition, will be published by Yale University Press. He also has a forthcoming volume from Princeton University Press on Maulana Rumi, the person who's the subject of tonight's program. Omid Safi also blogs at On Being. You can access that by onbeing.org. He leads a summer program focused on the Sufi tradition of Maulana Rumi in Turkey and Morocco. Before I invite him, I want to say something about Omid real quickly to you, which is for the last 18 months, I've had the opportunity to work with him. He serves on the advisory board of Renovation, the journal we're talking about here. And I've gotten to know him a little bit. He's been an amazing person. He's been a great help for me and for the editorial team of Renovation. And he has been a pleasure to work with, comes up with great ideas for themes and topics. And we're truly honored to have him here tonight. So please welcome Professor Omid Safi.
Well, Asalaamu, Alaikum. May the peace and blessings of God be with you, in you, around you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As-salatu was-salam ala ashraf al-makhluqat was-sayyid al-mursaleen. Walhamdulillah rabbil alameen. So it would not be a proper Rumi talk if we didn't start with a great Rumi story. And this is not one of those Rumi stories that you're going to find online. This actually is something that requires digging into some old books, but good books. So I didn't make up this story, but this is a story good enough to have been made up if it weren't. It's from the oldest and most reliable biography that we have of Hazrat Maulana. I will alternate between calling him Maulana, meaning our teacher, our master, our guide, and calling him Rumi. Rumi is in deference to our English-loving friends who've gotten to know him and love him. No one ever called him Rumi in his lifetime. Rumi means the Roman, the one from Rome, not pizza Italy Rome, but what the Muslim geographers called Rome, which was the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, Constantinople. He's not called Rumi for another 200 years after he passes away. So sometimes we'll call him Rumi, sometimes we may call him Maulana. Maulana was, as some of our bold and fierce sisters might say today, unapologetically Muslim. Unapologetically in love with God and seeking that divine love through humanity. Maulana, like Everest, doesn't just appear out of the thin air. So one of the reasons that I was especially delighted that our conversation tonight could be called Rumi and the Path of Divine Love is to remind ourselves that there's been a tradition, there's been a legacy that goes back to the Prophet and moves through hundreds of years of the friends of God before we end up with someone as majestic as Rumi. Just like we don't get Everest without the Himalayas. Right? There are all these gigantic beings, these luminous women and men who inspire each other, who love on one another, who embody the qualities of beauty in one another. So Rumi's unapologetically Muslim, unapologetically in love with the divine and seeing that divine presence all around. Right? This is a tradition which says if you get thirsty and you want to have a drink of water, this, ladies and gentlemen, is called a pedagogical point. I'm thirsty. I need a drink of water. Let's make it a teaching point. Before he would pick up the glass of water and start drinking in 3 gulps, as we are taught in our tradition, he would kiss the glass. Because he said that every being has a soul. The glass has a soul and the water has a soul. And you want to acknowledge and honor the soul of everything as much as you do of everyone. He's committed to this tradition, and he's committed to teaching in a place that perhaps like the Bay Area, like New York City, like most of America, must not make political commentary, must not make political commentary, must not make political commentary. If love can be said to be apolitical, then we got nothing to say. What could be more political than the notion that human beings are created by Allah? Each and every single person has divine breath and spirit in them, and every single life is precious and sacred. Right? The reason that the poor, the hungry, the orphan, the widow, the stranger, the refugee have dignity is not because of the passport that they carry, but because of that breath of the divine that's inside all of us. So love and politics sometimes go back together. And in Rumi's context, he was used to speaking in the city of Konya, a place where the elite spoke Persian. The class below them spoke Turkish. The common people were Greek. The religious scholars studied Arabic. You had Jews and Armenians and Kurds. Oh my. Right? And he is someone who comes out of the heart of this radical love tradition. We don't get Rumi without 500 years of love mystics before him. And he's going to bring these teachings into the public space, unapologetically Muslim, but teaching everybody. Many people liked him. Many people admired him. Not everybody loved him. Not everybody loved Jesus, peace be upon him. Not everybody loved our blessed prophet. And not everybody loves the children of the prophets, the heirs of the prophets. So there were some people in Rumi society, we could call them, I don't know, what's the nice term for it? Bigots. Haters. The not yet illuminated. The spiritually dim. The light of Allah is in you, but sweet Lord is covered up in muck. And these folks were there in Konya, as they are with us today, and they have always been. And they love to find occasions to critique Maulana's circle. Maulana has come. This is a very political statement. Where has Maulana come from? I'm about to lose 80% of the audience based on what I say here. Should I say he comes from Afghanistan, Feraidoon Jan? Should I say he was a Persian? Which he was. Should I say he comes from that meeting ground near Balkh? Not actually Balkh, but Vakhsh, actually, a small little village. The Russians think he was Russian. The Bay Area people, he's from Marin County. So perhaps the most diplomatic Muslim answer to where is Rumi from is Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. He comes from God and he's returning to God. Why get caught up over the little details in the middle? One thing we know is that he spoke Persian, and 99% of his poems are in Persian. He's got some beautiful lines of Arabic poetry, a few choice Turkish and Greek words here and there, but he mainly taught in Persian. And he's teaching a multicultural, multiracial, multilinguistic audience, which is a challenge. It's easy to be drawn to the luminous and the fully realized saints. I always kind of gravitate towards the ones who stumble and fall flat on their face, because that's us. Rumi has a Christian young disciple named Sir Yanis, probably of Greek origin, who loves him. Every day, he's there in the front row, listening to every morsel of beauty that comes out of Maulana's mouth. And he's a Greek speaker. And here's Maulana speaking classical Persian. He might as well be speaking Latin to him. But he's trying really, really hard. And he's trying to express his yearning for God in this language that's not his mother tongue. Right? This is something I always tell my own children, who still make fun of the way that I pronounce a few words, like Tuesday. And they say, no, Baba, it's Tuesday. Coupon. No, it's coupon. And I try to remind them, never make fun of someone who speaks with an accent. It just means that they speak other languages. Right? And this Sir Yanis speaks with an accent, and he messes up his elegant Persian words. So in the Persian of that time, much like Victorian English, we had some different words for God. Just like you can talk about Lord Byron. In Persian, you can talk about Khuda and Khudavand. One of them means Lord. You could call someone the Lord of a village. And then there's another one that refers only to God. And this poor little Greek speaker guy, he's like, and Lord, capital L, Maulana Rumi said, he called him God. People got really upset. And some of these fundamentalist types, the not fully illuminated types, they sort of came and they got him and they dragged him and they took him to a judge. And they said, this heretic, this bigot, this misguided soul called Maulana God. We should execute him immediately for heresy. Because that would, of course, solve the problem. And the judge, who like many judges, combined his knowledge of Islamic law with a deep humanity, said, well, what you report him having said is indeed problematic. But let's find out what the poor man actually said. Son, what did you call him? And he's like, I called him God. And the judge is like, not helpful. Distinctly not helpful. Get the bonfire ready. Last chance. What did you mean to call him? And here's where I fell in love with this disciple, and Sir Yanis. And he's like, I always do this. I say the wrong thing. I didn't mean to call him God. And the judge is like, hold the fire. Talk to me, son. What did you mean to call him? And he says, I meant to call him Khuda Saz, God maker. And the fundamentalist types are like, we're going to crucify him upside down, burn him, bury his ashes, and delete every email that he's ever sent, right? And here's the part where I hope Rumi's message has something to offer us today. The judge says, son, you're talking about a 50-year-old human being. He was born, he will die. How could he not only be God, he could be God-maker? And Sir Yanis, for the second time, says, I always do this. I always use the wrong word. When I called him God-maker, what I meant to say was, he makes God real to me. He says, until I met Rumi, God was an idea in my head. He was a word on a page. When I saw the love that shines from him, I knew that God had to be real. That's what I was trying to say. Right? And there are beings like this. You at Zaytuna are blessed with a community like this. You have teachers and exemplars, and I just saw Imam Zaid, I think, walking in. Asalaamu, Alaikum. You have exemplars like this. People that when you're with them, you know that God is real. This is what one of the gifts of Maulana has been to us and to humanity. What I would like to do in the little bit of time that we have is to share a couple of nuggets about how one may go about studying this exquisite masterpiece, the Masnavi. This is one of the golden treasures of Islamic spirituality. There are few books in the history of Islamic literature that have ever been copied, commented on, and interpreted as often as the Masnavi. We have entire academies in the Ottoman Empire, in Bosnia, which were devoted to the study of this one text. Right? Think about other than scripture. Can we think of other human texts that have inspired such deep love and loyalty among people? And if you have this handout, or if you're sitting next to someone who has this handout, can I see a show of hands of approximately how many of you have this handout? Okay. You will see that the way that the Masnavi was written and illuminated was directly patterned after the Quran. Right? This is not, of course, unheard of. We have biblical texts and the texts of the Torah that are also illuminated in a very similar style. This requires the cooperation of different artists, a calligrapher, and illumination artists together. And one of the things that I want you to know and to notice is that the opening pages of the Masnavi always have these little tiny arrows that are pointing you off the page, right? And if you're familiar with illuminated Quran manuscripts, you'll see the same arrows. So what are those arrows doing? They're literally pointing your eyes off the page. They're telling you that the divine is revealed, yes, through words, yes, through scripture, yes, through literature and poetry, but you also have to look beyond the page. And what do you see if you let your eyes move beyond the page? The natural cosmos. This is one of the teachings of the love mystics in the Islamic tradition. They said that there's actually two scriptures that God created. One of them, takvini, one of them, tadvini. The little scripture, not this one, but a book, is the book that's written down. The Quran, the Torah. written scripture. The other one is the existential scripture. What would it mean to look at the natural cosmos as being God's grand scripture? What would it mean that, particularly as Muslims, but also as Jews, also as Japanese and others, writing is so sacred for us that before we would ever pick up the pen and start writing, we would have our ablutions? How would it treat the way that you put your toes in a stream? That you feel the wind brushing against your cheek? Would you treat each verse of scripture as also being related to the natural cosmos? And as your eyes lead you off the page, they must also come back to yourself. One of the goals of reading the Masnavi is to be able to detect the presence of Allah, yes, in poetry, but also in nature and in one another. Right? This is one of the ultimate teachings of Maulana and of all the great sages of Islam. If you claim to love Allah, show me how you're treating human beings. Show me the kindness, the tenderness, the love that you bring into your interaction with fellow humans. And you measure that in any society, as Christ taught us, by looking at the least of God's children. You look at the people who at the moment find themselves weak and vulnerable. However they are faring, that's the measure of how we stand with Allah. A society which is filled with poor and hungry and homeless has no business claiming to be a genuinely religious society. Right? So the Masnavi is setting up this connection between yourself, the poetry, and the natural cosmos. So I've been given the dubious task of having 50 minutes to talk about the Masnavi. And if you're a legit Rumi lover, if you've been initiated into Rumi's Mevlevi order, you should be laughing your tiny hiney off right now. Because they insist that the first 18 lines take 40 years. 50 minutes, folk. That's all we got. So this is, as our Turkish friends would say, a meze. It's a little appetizer. And on we go. Let's, if you have a handout, turn it to the third page. If not, I'm going to walk us hopefully through it. The Masnavi begins with an Arabic introduction. The Masnavi has 6 books, and Maulana starts them, each of the books, with a 1-page Arabic introduction. Most of the scholars from the eastern part of the Islamic world were bi or trilingual. We should be no less. If we have access only to one Islamic language, we're actually losing significant chunks of the treasure that has been passed down to us. Arabic is indispensable. We also have to learn Persian and Turkish and Urdu and proper English. English is today an Islamic language. Maulana starts with Hada Kitab al-Mathnavi. This is the book of the rhyming couplets. Here's a sign of when a book makes it. In the history of Persian literature, there have been thousands and thousands of rhyming couplets. It's the easiest way to make a long poetry book. It's A, A, B, B, C, C. Right? You can go on indefinitely rhyming. If you go to any Persian bookstore and be like, Asalaamu, Alaikum, do you have a copy of the rhyming couplets? There's only one book they're going to hand you. Rumi's Masnavi, Rumi's rhyming couplets. Like, that's legit. And it is the root of the root of the root of religion. It's the root of the root of the root of religion. It's a tree metaphor. My fiance and I, Corina, yesterday went for a beautiful walk in Muir Woods yesterday. That is a temple. That is holy and sacred ground right there. To see some of these trees that were alive before Rumi walked on this earth. Right? That's sacred. And we thought a lot about roots, trunks, and branches. Muslim scholars, as you all know, divided every discipline to the usul and the furu', the roots and the branches, or as we say down south, we got a different language in the south. It's not English. I had to become bilingual when we moved to the south. It's not roots, it's roots. And the roots of every tree do a few things for you. I was surprised to learn that these majestic redwoods actually have fairly shallow roots. But the reason that they last centuries is because they connect. We were not meant to stand alone. We're meant to form a community of seekers. The more our roots latch on to one another, the stronger we become. From the very beginning, Maulana gives you this metaphor of thinking of your existence as a tree, and that tree needs to be rooted, it needs to be grounded, it needs to be anchored, because guess what? The storms of life are coming. I started studying the Masnavi when I was 15 years old. I'm now not 15. When I read it with each passing decade, with less hair and slightly more girth, what I look for, what my eyes gravitate to, is a little different each time. Loved ones pass away. People that you care for so deeply struggle with cancer. You bury the children of your closest friends. Millions of people from a part of the world that you love are made homeless. The ones that you have given your body and heart and soul to sometimes betray you. The children whose diapers you have changed thousands of times look at you and say, "You don't know what it's like to be a kid." You feel like saying, "Girl, the only reason you're alive is because I took pity on your stinky diaper ass and changed you in the middle of the night. But you're right, I know nothing about what it's like to be a kid." Right? They come back. Whatever it is that anchors you, and Rumi encourages you to think about that. What are your roots in life? Is it your good name? Is it your wealth? Is it your degrees? Is it the kind of car you drive? Is it the zip code? How are those roots anchored themselves? What happens if the things that anchor you themselves start giving away? So he's constantly urging you to go deeper and deeper into your own being and to be thinking about what's your roots, and ultimately it is only Allah. And also, the other thing that the roots do for you is they nourish you. They sustain you. How many trees do you see that are brittle and dry and no longer given fruit? And if we look among ourselves, not at Zaytuna inshallah, but if we look at the human community, You see many people who are religious. They pray the right number of times using the proper pronunciation. But is there tenderness? Is there kindness? Is there mercy? Does their prayer end at the end of their prayer carpet? Or does it actually extend to the poor and the hungry in their own home or around the corner? Maulana is calling us to a faith that is moist and tender and alive and growing, so that when the storms of life hit you, you have something to stand on. And quickly he goes from that language to something that is sensual, some could say mystical, perhaps even erotic. This is one of the amazing aspects of Maulana's poetry. He will go from a verse of the Quran to a sensual love poem before you've had a chance to take a break. في كشف أسرار الوصول واليقين, in unveiling the heart secrets of union and certainty. And the words that he uses, asrar, right? That's the plural of secrets. But for the Sufis, a sir, a secret, is also the name of the innermost layer of your heart. The ultimate secrets of God are ones that you have to also find inside your own soul. God is not merely up there somewhere. God is not only transcendent. God is both transcendent and close. Nearer than the jugular vein, as the Quran says. And unveiling. May we be spared from another book that is obsessed with what Muslim women should or should not put on their hair. There are 8 gazillion, that's a proper Southern word, 8 gazillion Unveiling Islam books. When Maulana and the Sufis use the word veiling and unveiling, it has nothing to do with a piece of cloth that you pull over your hair. Unveiling in Sufi language is unveiling of the divine beloved. It is removing what is veiling your eyes from seeing the presence of Allah all around. That's why one of the earliest Sufi classics that we have in the Persian language is Kashful Mahjub, unveiling of the veiled beloved, by Hujviri, buried in Pakistan. And because his day job is as a professor of Islamic law in a madrasa that fine, reputable Muslim institution of higher learning, unless you pronounce it the southern way. A madrasa, Muslim seminary, a university, a madrasa, a scary place on Fox News where terrorists are bred. Maulana's day job is to work in a madrasa as a professor of Islamic law. Daytime, law professor. Nighttime, lover, poet, mystic. And here he plays with these words. This is, he says, it's the most luminous path to God, using the word fiqh, Islamic jurisprudence, was shar'ullah al-azhar, and it's the most manifest proof of God, sharia. So he's writing a book of love poetry using the language of Islamic law. The conversations about do you have to be Muslim to read Rumi, who owns Rumi, like we all have them, they're important. We could sit there and talk about how there's about 3,000 references to the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet in Rumi's poetry. He is so thoroughly shaped by the Muslim imagination, by his intimacy with the Quran that it's, in the words of Princess Bride, inconceivable to try to read him outside of that context. It would have made no sense to him, much less so to any of his audience members. Not on this beautiful version that is on the handout that some of you have, but on the oldest copy of the Masnavi that has survived to us. This is one from the year 1278 of the Common Era, the Christian era. There's an editor who's gone through with a red pen and made some correction remarks. And for those people who have spent their life studying Rumi's Masnavi in the manuscript, we know whose handwriting that is. And it's the handwriting of his son, Sultan Balad. And Sultan Balad has some beautiful things to say about the Masnavi. He writes a commentary on how to read his dad's writings. Right? Being Rumi's son, by the way, no pressure. It's like being Michael Jordan's son and trying to pick up a basketball, you know? It's like, so, your dad composed 60,000 lines of love poetry while being a professor. His book was actually called The Quran in Persian. How's your career going, Sultan Balad? Right? He writes a commentary on the Masnavi and he says, I had to write this book because people are stupid. When my dad is talking about the king and the maiden and the smith, the nomad and his wife, the parrot and the merchant, these are all stories in the first volume of the Masnavi, they think that he's talking about the king and the maiden and the smith and the parrot and the merchant. He said, I had to write this commentary so that they learn that you, my friend, are the king. You are the merchant and you are the maiden. Every character that you read in the Masnavi represents a tendency inside you. We're not going to do too much bashing of white people here, because that's just easy. And we're not going to bash too much the easiest of white people to make fun of, who are the Orientalists. People who spend their whole life studying texts, but didn't want to actually meet Muslims, because Muslims complicate the picture. They would sit at Oxford, Cambridge, master Arabic and Persian, and they did some really great stuff. One of them, R.A. Nicholson, spent 15 years translating the whole of the Masnavi at a time when we didn't have printed versions of it. It was all manuscript. So mad love and props for the good that they did. They also said things like, the Masnavi, like the Quran, it's like an Oriental bazaar. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no logic. There's no structure. It's just a bunch of stories after stories within stories around stories. It's the way the Oriental mind works. It is lacking the logic and order of white people mentality. So every time I see one of the traffic jams, I'm like, how's that logic working out for you? Not so good. Should have planned better, you know? The Orientalist approach to the Masnavi was that it was a book singularly lacking in structure. What I'm going to try to do, I've got 20 minutes left, is to actually make the argument that there is an overarching theme to the first book of the Masnavi. The Masnavi is not just a bunch of random stories. It represents the path that we all have to walk on. And like the Quran, the Masnavi begins with people where we are. Right? Sometimes you meet sweet, inspired, aspiring Muslims who are like, this year I will read the Quran cover to cover. Worst idea ever. They read the Fatiha. Yes, it's like the Lord's Prayer. They get to Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter. They get about 30 verses in, and they're like, God is mean. In your heart there is a sickness, and God will increase the sickness in your heart. There's a barrier before you and a barrier after you. And they're like, I'm going to close this book, and I'm going to back away slowly, and when God gets nice, let me know. Right? We could have a whole conversation about why Surah Al-Fatiha is the way that it is, right? That's our words. We have to call upon God, and then God responds. Why is God so mean to us in Surah Al-Baqarah? Why is it all about in your heart there's a sickness? Because that's where we are. We have a heart disease. We are hypocrites. We say one thing and we do another. Right? Speak to people at the level of their understanding. We were taught. This is what the Quran does. And this is what Rumi does in the Masnavi. You begin reading and we start with the song of the reed. Right? This is this magnificent metaphor of a bamboo shoot, the ney, the reed flute that is cut from the bed of reeds, Neyestan. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkmenistan, Neyestan, the land of reeds. And it's cut, and being cut hurts. And this flute is homesick. It misses its home. And Rumi's telling you, right, think about what are you missing? As juda'i ha shikayat mikonad. What are you lamenting? Which separations in the plural? Not one separation, many separations. For some of us, it's physical. We miss our homeland. There's a place with majestic mountain or dry desert, or those smog-filled hills of Iran, where to walk in the air is as if to smoke a pack of cigarettes. And I miss it. There's physical homesickness. They are the people who are your home. Right? Where she is, that is your home. It might be your baba, it might be your mother, it might be a friend, a lover. But there are people who make a place home. And to be away from them is anguish. And there are some for whom they are separated not from a land and not from a person, but from their own dreams. As a teacher, this is something that I see all the time. Students that I taught 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and they're like, I thought life was going to go this way. I thought I was going to be this. I thought I was going to do that. And I'm just sitting in a cubicle. I don't feel like I'm making a difference. They are in exile from their own hopes and dreams and visions. And that's pain. So why does the Masnavi start with a story of pain and suffering? Right? Every time I try to teach the Masnavi, people are like, you told me this was a love poem. Where's the kissy stuff? Where's the I am one with the beloved and the beloved is one with me? I don't want to think about suffering. Right? So this is not, for your second Princess Bride reference, this is not quite the life is pain, Your Highness, and anyone who tells you otherwise is trying to sell you something philosophy of life. The good news is there is joy, there is redemption, there is salvation, but not until you confront your genuine suffering in this world, your own suffering and other people's suffering. He goes on from there, and he starts by telling you a story of the king and the maiden, And somewhere around the 100th line of the Masnavi, he uses this analogy of eshq, which is not just love. Eshq is radical love. In the way that these Persian-speaking mystics defined it, it's hubb, it's love when it goes too far. It's extreme love. Right? The little anthology that I have coming out, inshallah, in April, called Eshq or Radical Love, I showed it to my father, and he was like, "Oh, Omid Jan, I'm very proud of you. Inshallah, this will do a lot of good. I'm concerned about the word radical." Couldn't it be a little more moderate? You know? Yes. Brother Martin, at the end of his life, talks about wanting to reclaim the word radical, to be an extremist in the cause of love. Right? So that's the aspect of things that we're trying to recover here. And Rumi talks about lover's ailment is totally unique. Love is the astrolabe of all we seek. eshq astrolabe asrar khudast. So what is an astrolabe? An astrolabe is essentially the medieval GPS. You're lost, you want to go home. A good GPS will have a go home button. I want to go home. You would hold it up, you would line it up to the stars, and then you would know which way's north, which way's home. What Rumi's telling you here is that we're all lost. We actually don't know which way's up. But there is a way to God, and that way is love. Love, if there's one thing I hope you remember from this talk, love for Maulana is not just an emotion. We're having this talk on Valentine's Day because we should. Because love is good. Love is divine. But love is not a Hallmark card. Love is not an emoji. Love is the unleashing of God onto this realm. Love is the overflowing of the divine that compels God to create. It is love that brought you here. It is love that sustains you here. And it is this same love that will carry you back home. Right? This is what the Sufis of the radical love path used to call eshq kehani, cosmic love. It's not just sentimental emotion, though that's a shade of it too. It is that there's this current that is erupting out of God, flowing through creation, and leading back to God. And if you can get over yourself, if you can get over your three favorite people being me, myself, and I, and actually put love into service, ask the ones you love the simple question, how can I love you better? And if you merge with that river, then we're going to end up back at home. And to go back to that theme of love and politics, to remember that for the Sufis and for the grand American tradition, the prophetic tradition of Martin and Malcolm, Reverend Barber and Cornel West, all that we mean by justice is love when it comes into the public spaces. That's all we mean by justice. I love my babies. I know what I would want for my babies. Food in their belly, dignity in their bones, love in their hearts. And you grant that other people love their babies just as much. So you would do for other people's babies what you would wish somebody would do for your babies. That's when love becomes a prophetic, radical force of social justice. And to say that we all got to find our way back home, this is where the rest of the Masnavi becomes this conversation about love in the context of these different stories. Feraidoon, I'm looking at you to see how many glances you're giving me about wrap it up, wrap it up. No? Don't? Okay. Whenever you want to give me those glances, just give me one of those and I'll get you. This love is what gives us a taste of following in the footsteps of the prophets. This is your chance, your opportunity to encounter the divine. So Maulana says things like, هر نفس آواز عشق میرسد از چپ و راست ما به فلک میرویم عزم تماشا کراست. In every breath comes love's calling. I am leaping heavenwards. Who wants to watch? This leaping is that ascension. It's when you get over the confines of your own ego and you say, it's no longer about me, it's about you. It's about the service that I can bring to you. And any of us who have loved our children, you know this, you have lived this. It's 2 o'clock in the morning and the baby cries because she has a poopy diaper or she's hungry. Somebody, usually the mother, some of us fathers, leaps out of bed, not because you wouldn't love to just stay in bed. It's comfortable and warm in the bed. And you don't sit there having an Aristotelian conversation with yourself. Is this a virtue to jump out of bed? Should this virtue become a habit? If somebody had done that for Aristotle, he would be dead. You leap out of bed because love compels you. Your child is hungry, and to serve that child takes precedence over your own ego. That's love. That's as beautiful and noble as love gets. And if you can bring that service into the love of a beloved, of a friend, of a neighbor, of a parent, of a stranger, then we're on the path of love. We're creating a community of love. We can't have the beloved community that Martin talks about without love. Community needs that love. He goes on in the Masnavi. He tells you the story of Layla and Majnoon. I'm going to tell you 3 more stories and then end. I'm not going to say how long those stories are going to take, but 3 stories. The first story that you're going to see is the story of the Khalifa and Layla. This is the great story of Layla and Majnoon. It's around line 400, 410. So we know that Majnoon is this love-crazed soul who falls in love with a girl named Layla. He composes the most beautiful love poems that if you read them, the rocks would cry out. And if a rock cries out, how much more does a human heart? And the Khalifa hears one of these poems and he's like, I got to meet me, this Layla. Anybody who inspires such poetry has to be an angel incarnate. It's a story, right? Or not history, it's his story. It's good to be the Khalifa. So he's like, bring me all the girls from Layla's village. They bring all the girls. And the Khalifa is very excited. And he walks in and he's like, I'm going to see which one of these girls. One of these girls has to be a girl of such unsurpassing beauty that as soon as I walk in, I'm going to find her. and she's going to match the poems. And so he walks in, starts looking at the crowd. Is she here? Yeah, she's here. Country Bumpkin, Plain Jane, Fairly Normal Fatima, Not Entirely Amazing Aisha. Are you Layla? Is one of you Layla? And Layla steps forth. Nice girl. Great personality. But not outstanding in her beauty. And so the Khalifa looks at her and looks at the poems. Are you Layla? And Layla responds, and the Laylas of this world do speak back. I am Layla, but you are not Majnoon. And Maulana goes on to say, in order to see the beauty of Layla, you have to look through the eyes of Majnoon. Right? The Sufi path is not just about meditating until you see colors. Although that's a part of it too. It's not just about stories of miraculous and wondrous deeds. Although it's about that too. The Sufi path begins by teaching you how to train your heart so that you look at someone through the glance of love. We're having this conversation, this difficult conversation in our country and around the world about how do we, and in particular, how do men look at, talk with, and touch women? What would it mean to have a commitment to say that the only touch that would ever come from you to anyone would be a touch that is comforting and healing and wanted? What would it mean if the only glance that comes from you is a loving and comforting glance? That the only words that come from you are words that are worthy of the beauty of the person you're with. Until we have cleansed our tongue, our breath, our touch, our glance, and other organs, we're not fully on the path of love. We still got work to do. He goes on, the second to last story is a story of Gabriel and the Prophet. Gabriel and the Prophet. This is around line 1070. So we get this story in many of the mystical commentaries on the Habib, the Prophet's ascension to God. That the Prophet has been taken from Mecca to Jerusalem through the layers of heaven. He meets with Moses and Abraham and Christ, rises above all these realms, enters into the vicinity of the divine. And according to this version of the stories, at one point as they get very close to God, Gabriel, who's been carrying the Prophet, stops, comes to full halt, and lowers his wing and puts the Prophet on the ground. And the Prophet turns to him and says, "My faithful companion, you had been with me since Mecca to Jerusalem, all the levels of heaven. Why are you stopping here?" And Gabriel responds by saying, "From this point on, the intensity of God's love is too strong. If I take a step as wide as one of my feathers, all of me is going to burn up. But you, Muhammad, since you are made in love since you are mercy incarnate, since you are rahmatun lil alameen, love can enter into love. So you go. And the Prophet enters into divine presence. We know the rest of the story. He's given a choice. Does he want to stay there forever? And his response is ummati, my people. Right? So this is the Prophet as a bodhisattva. I'm not going to have bliss for myself. I will return to my people so that they can have their own ascension, so that they can come to encounter God directly. For the Muslim scholars, the angels are made out of intellect. This was a theological doctrine that many of them held. So think about what Rumi's telling you. If you want to be saved, if you want to get to heaven, intellect can do it. But if you want to see the face of Allah, you need both an intellectual life and a loving spiritual life. These are the two wings of a bird if you wish to soar. Ours is not a faith of intellectualism devoid of love, or pure sentimentality devoid of intellect. These two need to be balanced with one another. The last of the stories that, with your permission, I'll mention, and then we'll make the transition to our conversation, is the last story in the first book of the Masnavi, arguably the most famous story, which is the enemy who spits on the face of Imam Ali. Right? Now remember, Maulana, like almost all the great Persian Sufis, is a good Sunni boy. People sometimes have a hard time with this. Iran was the center of Sunni Islam for centuries. The center of Shiism was Egypt. Right? We kind of flipped. And contemporary Iranians, because we love the Prophet, yes, and the family of the Prophet, yes, yes. We get to this story and we're like, see, I told you he was a Shia. He wasn't a Shia. He loved Imam Ali because everybody did back then. Loving the Prophet, loving Imam Ali, loving Imam Hassan and Hussein and Fatima didn't make you a Sunni or a Shia. It just made you a caring Muslim. The first part of the story seems to have a historical kernel, and then at some point it gets Rumified. Really bad pun coming in 3, 2, 1. We engage in some rumination. Thank you, thank you. The Prophet is engaging the pagan army, and in very proud Arab tradition, we're going to first send our poets. If our poets can mock your poets, we win. You go home. The power of the spoken word. If that doesn't work, let's not kill all of our armies because it's not really efficient. We'll just send our champion. And you send your champion. So the Arabs sent the Hulk. This guy who in this story is just called the Mountain Man. Guess why? And he starts talking trash. Send me your best warriors and make it quick. The Prophet turns to the companions and he's like, I promise you one of two things. Either you will beat him or you will have access to paradise. And it's like the scene from Monty Python. Everybody takes a step back. And Ali, who's still a teenager, he's probably around 15 or 16. He's like, me, messenger of God. I will fight him. And the Prophet is like, Ali, you're a kid. Sit down. Let me find a proper man. The mountain man is now ratcheting up his trash talking. I thought you all were so eager to meet your God. And the Prophet is like, I'm waiting. One real man is all we need. Ali's like, please, 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 let me go fight him. Everything happens in threes. The third time, the Prophet is like, Ali, nice knowing you. Go have a beautiful death. And they go and they fight and they wrestle. And at some point, Ali picks up the mountain man, lifts him over his head, throws him to the ground, sits on his chest, this is his sword, takes out Zulfaqar, right? The only sword cool enough to have a name. And he's going to cut his head off. Side note, the Muslim tradition has rarely been a pacifist tradition, even among our saints. But it has been a tradition where there's a legitimate and an illegitimate usage of violence. The question we have to ask today, does violence have a place in a world where we could destroy the world over 5,000 times? The mountain man is on the ground. At this point, we're fully in Rumi world. And he's never lost a battle before, and now he's lost to a kid. He's disgusted, he looks up, and he spits on Ali's face out of sheer disgust. Ali takes his sword, puts it back in his sheath, and begins walking around in a circle. What follows, this is awesome, is a 20-page mystical dialogue. Ali turns to him, the warrior turns to Ali, and he said, what just happened? Like, you beat me, you could have finished me, and now you're walking away. Ali answers, you think you're the mountain man, but I'm the real mountain here. You see, when you spat on my face, I got angry. Up until then, everything that I had done, it was for the sake of God. But if I kill you, I would be killing you because I got angry. It's no longer for the sake of God. Right? Side note, Ali, for Rumi, is an example of insan kamil, a fully realized human being. To be a real human being doesn't mean that you no longer experience anger. You do. You get angry. You might get hurt. You might even get lustful. But you don't have to act on it. The mark of a fully realized human being is when you observe your emotion and you say, not today, Satan. I experience anger, but it will not come out of my hand. It will not come out of my glands, and it will not come out of my mouth. That actually gives us hope. As a human being who's driving and someone cuts you off, and you go into your encyclopedia of 4-letter words, or you want to, and then at some point, may God have mercy on you, you not yet fully realized human being. You want to go home and rethink your life. Yes. I do this, like when someone does something to really annoy me, I'm going to take this energy and put it over here. I see your words and I'm going to move them over here because I don't want them to get inside me. Yes. The mystical conversation goes on, and the warrior says, okay, so this is really great. I'd love to sign up for this Islam thing and give it a shot. But now that I'm one of you, tell me the truth. Why didn't you kill me? And that's where we're going to stop, with your permission today. Ali glances into him, into his eyes, and says, it's really because when I sat on your chest and I was gonna kill you, I looked into your eyes and I saw a reflection of myself. And I thought to myself, how can Ali kill Ali? If I kill you, I've killed off a part of myself. That's one of the gifts that the path of love offers us. we come to the path of love not only with the stranger, the friend, the lover, the parent, the child, but also with the enemy. It gives the possibility of seeing the humanity of a person that until 5 minutes ago, or until a breath ago, we had dismissed as the enemy. They too still possess full humanity. And sometimes, heck, it's time for one outright political commentary. For our Trump-loving friends, the most humane and loving thing that you can do is to stop them, is to educate them, is to organize, to uplift the voice of people who are really suffering. That legacy is one that Maulana is leaving us with. You all have inherited a 1400-year legacy of love. It goes back to the Prophet. Maulana was called Farzand Jan Mustafa, the offspring of the soul of the Prophet. He says at one point, every tree offers you some fruit, but if you ever want to see which apple tree is the sweetest, look at which one's branches are hanging lowest to the ground. And he says, of all the apple trees, it was our Prophet whose fruit were the sweetest because his branches were almost touching the ground. Right? For him, humility is a sign that you have something to offer. Being prideful and holding your head up high may it be, my friends, that the teachings of Rumi, the teachings of the Prophet as exemplified through this radical love path, offer you, offer us, and offer this wounded world a way of redemption, a way of healing, and inshallah, a way of ascending to see God face to face. Thank you for the gift of your time.
Wow, thank you so much, Ahmed. Um, that was a Persian talking. Now we go to the man from Afghanistan. In introducing our next speaker, I think those of you in the Bay Area ought to know him. If you don't already, you should. Ustad Feraidoon Mojadedi is an entrepreneur. He's a community leader. He's a lecturer. He's a lover in the ways that Omid described being a lover. He was born in Herat, Afghanistan, and moved with his family to the United States in 1985 after the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. Feraidoon grew up in a household with a deep love and reverence for poetry. He began to memorize poems by Rumi when he was 5 years old. Omid, I think you said 15 for you, so he got you beat there. And it developed for him into a real passion over the years, and he ended up teaching classes all across the United States and California, in the United Kingdom, in Australia, and all kinds of places, including in Konya, Turkey, where Maulana is laid to rest. The nuances of the Farsi language in which he is fluent allowed Feraidoon the unique ability to bring Rumi's poetry to life and to help listeners recognize his essential message of love, coexistence, and connection with the divine. Feraidoon, as an entrepreneur, is the founder of a bookstore called the Rumi Bookstore, and of Sacred Caravan, which organizes trips for the Umrah and the Hajj. And I had the benefit, along with my wife Diane, to take those trips. And I have to say here that they describe it in the Sacred Caravan website as the come experience, the journey of a lifetime. Um, that's good advertising. It's no, um, it's not hyperbole. I want to say one more thing before I bring Feraidoon up here. That Feraidoon has a long-standing relationship and a great friendship with Zaytuna College, in particular with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. He was the person who inaugurated with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf the classes at the Islamic Studies School in Hayward, California, which is in the Bay Area, which became then the Zaytuna Institute, which then became this Zaytuna College. So please give a warm welcome to Sidi Feraidoon Mojadedi.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Asalaamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Greeting of peace and love. I wish this would have gone on over there than here. Thank you very much for coming to the Bay Area, and what a beautiful lecture. Can we, one more round of applause for Dr. Rumi and Safi. Every time I hear him, I want to hear more and more and more. May Allah bless him and his family and protect him and increase him. When I think about what we wanted to talk about, I sent him a message. I said, is there any topic, anything you want to talk about, or we should leave it unplugged and raw? He said, let's let the hearts go where it goes. Because in reality, you know, when I think about love, everybody wants to know the philosophy of love, right? That's the search. Everybody wants, what is the philosophy of love? One of the Urdu poets said, he said, Kui falsafa nahi eshq ka, jaha dil chuki wahi sar chuka. He said, there is no philosophy of love. Wherever the heart goes, the head bows down there. So I think that this was a lecture that it actually moved the hearts of many of us who are sitting here. And people have been getting messages from live stream that what an amazing program. One thing about love, that's Maulana Rumi's love, that's amazing, is what he mentioned about the story of Layla and Majnoon. He has quite a few stories about Layla and Majnoon, but one of them is when Qais from Bani Amir, this beautiful young man who falls in love with Layla, and he becomes Majnoon. I mean, Majnoon means a madman, literally. He wasn't a madman, his name was Qais, he was a normal person, but he falls in love with Layla, and they call him Qais the Majnoon, Qais the Majnoon, Majnoon the Qais, then Qais disappears and he becomes Majnoon. And he becomes a symbol of love. But there's a story that when Majnoon became crazy and about Layla, and everywhere was saying Layla, Layla, and the father of Layla was really upset, the parents of Layla and the family of Layla, that this boy is really, what he's doing is not ethical, it's not good for our family name. And Rumi said there was a wedding, and they went to a wedding, and when they went, they saw the tribe of Bani Amr there, that they were there too. So Layla's family like, oh my God, Majnoon's family is going to be here. What should we do with Layla? And he's going to come. If he sees Layla, he's going to create a mess. So they said, you know what? We need to hide Layla. Where should we hide her? They look around, and there's a well. And they said, let's put her inside the well, and she can sit there, and then once the gathering is over, we'll pick her up and we go home. Nobody will see her. It's a brilliant idea. So they put her inside of the wells. People who grew up in third world countries, we all had wells in the backyards, and, you know, you took the water out. So she goes, there's the stairs, and he goes down the well and sits at the bottom. Then 20 minutes later, Majnoon's family walks in, and they see Layla's parents there with Majnoon. So, oh my God, Layla's parents are inside. Layla must be there. If we take Majnoon, it's going to be chaos. What should we do with Majnoon? And they say, you know what? There's a well. Let's put Majnoon inside the well. And once it's over, we'll pick him up and we go home. Nothing will happen. He's safe. So they go, okay, Majnoon goes down the well, and they go inside, and there's a wedding going on and having a good time, right? Now, one of the contemporary Persian philosophers said something interesting. He said, what do you think happened inside the well? Like, really, what do you think happened inside the well? He said, nothing, because love was the chaperone. That is true love. That is real love. And what Ustad was talking about is the love is not the love of ephemeral, it's the love of the eternal. That they were in love with Allah. And what Majnoon saw in Layla is that penetration through the form into the meaning. And this is what Ustad talked about tonight, about the meaning. In Maulana Rumi's poetry, you see meanings and meanings and meanings throughout his poems. And he says, Dar khar bibin gul ra, birun hama kas binad. See the rose and the thorn. Once it blooms, everybody sees it. This is the vision of Maulana Rumi, that he sees through the form. And in the Masnavi, there's not a chapter of the book that you read that you don't come through these lines where it shakes you up. What are you living your life of form? Of seeing how many marriages are destroyed because of form, how many relationships are destroyed because of form, how many people lose life partners because of the form of the person, not seeing the meaning, not seeing the meaning. And this is what Maulana Rumi throughout, he talks about the one thing, to see the meaning, because al-ma'na hu Allah, the ultimate meaning is God. That you will reach God at one point if you see the meanings and the forms that you're looking at. And this is one of the things that Chishti, the great Chishti, rahmatullah alayh, he said, Bahar chi mi nigaram, juz khuda nemi binam. And everything that I look, I see nothing other than God. And that's when you can penetrate through the form into the meaning. And what I wanted to start this conversation is ask Ustad something. How does one achieve this? I know Maulana says, Palla palla ta mulaqat khuda, step by step until you get the divine presence. Abdullah Al-Ansari wrote the book, Manazir al-Sa'irin, 100 Steps to God. And these are all practices. They start with the first step of Tawbah, and you go through all of these Futuwah and this and that. It's a process. Yeah, that's one aspect of it. What is Rumi's steps in order to get to this station where you can see the meaning and not just the form?
So if you read through the Masnavi, and in the beginning, he starts with us where we are. We are caught in our realm of ego. The characters in the beginning of the Masnavi, they're angry, they're lustful, they want to possess what is not theirs. And you keep reading, and he talks about love as the GPS, as the Astrolabe of God's secrets. And when you get to the middle parts of the book, which really are talking about how love changes your heart. And he talks about softening your heart. He has a line that he says, Salha to sang budi dil kharash, azmun ra yek zamani khak bash. For years you've been a stony-hearted man. Try being like the soil now, if you can. Right? He loves metaphors of gardening, of planting seeds. Right? Remember that the words for love have many different origins. One of them has to do with the seed that grows. Other poets like Hafez tell us, let us make one vow in this love affair, that in the field of our heart we will plant nothing but love. Right? A seed cannot grow on stone. As long as our hearts are hardened, there's nothing that's going to reach fruition in them. And that kind of softening, that kind of humility is necessary for the seed of love to grow in our own hearts. And just as the path is a balance between aql and eshq, intellect and love, the path of love is also like a prayer. Not the Madonna kind. That's what happens when you grow up in the 80s, like all of your references have like references to 80s pop songs. If you think about the prayers, the salat or the namaz, in the beginning of the prayer, we stand straight. Where you put your hands, I'm not concerned with that right now. We're in it for the root of the root of the root, not the branches. When you stand straight, in that posture, you represent the one, the alif, that is both insan, the human, and Allah. There's a part of the prayer that is about the quality of representing God on earth, and that's majestic. And as you move through the prayer, you come more and more humble, and you take the part in you that is most prized, the highest crown chakra in other traditions, and you put that on the same soil that you come from. Without the divine breath, we are nothing but dust. And for the prayers to be complete, there has to be this cycle of moving from the majestic qualities to the humble qualities. It's the balancing of these two that create a fully realized human being. And the path of love is like a prayer in this sense. The only majesty that we have thought of is the tyranny of our ego. And we want to come back to a notion of humility on one hand and a genuine kind of majesty, which is not based on being a pharaoh, but actually representing God on earth. Right? One of the ways that Maulana tells you to read the Quran says, don't read it like a history book. It's not just about Moses and Pharaoh and Ibrahim and Noah. He asks you again and again and again, who is the Moses of your soul? Who is the Pharaoh of your soul? What part of you acts like a Pharaoh in your own household? What does the Pharaoh say in the Quran? I am the Lord on high. Right? When do we walk into our home in front of our kids? Because I said so. Right? What part of us acts like a Pharaoh? And what part of us can be like a Moses, can be like having these prophetic qualities? And that's where these prophetic qualities of humility come in. And that's where love comes in. If you read the Fihi Ma Fihi, the book of fireside chats that he gives, there's that wonderful analogy that he has with every one of us has a body, and the body is like Mary. When Mary was giving birth, she had to withdraw to a corner, and she experienced pain. She experienced suffering in giving birth. And until Mary was willing to welcome the pain, then the Jesus of spirit couldn't be born from her. And Maulana says, you too have a Mary inside you. You too have the Jesus of spirit inside you. Until you're willing to embrace and welcome suffering, then the Jesus of your spirit will not be born, but it will go back to that world from which it came from. This question of how to sit with our own suffering, much less the suffering of other people, I think is one of the genuine challenging lessons of the spiritual path. We are so uncomfortable with suffering. We try to avoid it in every way possible. But I think welcoming that suffering in ourselves allows us then to reach out to others in tenderness.
Thank you. And I think that humility, one of the things you mentioned, is a great sign of one of the tradition of our beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that the one who humbles himself, then God would raise him. He will be raised, or she will be raised if they are humble. And that is the sign of the Sa'di, the great Persian poet said, "Nahat shokha par miva sar bar zamin." And you see, like the Ustad said, that the branches of the tree that has the most fruit, they're always closest to the earth because of their humility. You know that they're full. And I think that what you mentioned is also love. Love removes the barrier in the baggage that we see. But I think one more thing that I kind of have to bring Hafiz into this. We are, lovers of Hafiz, the great poet of Shiraz. Then one thing that Hafiz said, he said, میان عاشق و معشوق هیچ حائل نیست تو خود حجاب خودی حافظ از میان برخیز. He said, there is no barrier between you and the beloved. You are the barrier. Get out of the way. And I think that that's the truth of that is many people, they don't know that lower self of themselves. They never get to know themselves. We get to know people across the globe, and we get to know the world. We get to know the politician. We get to know neighbors and everybody, except there are people who will die and yet not know themselves because they don't spend any time with themselves. They don't know who they are. And this concept in our tradition that called the nafs, that Rumi's book, I believe Rumi's book is about two things. Getting rid of the nafs in order for love to come in. And that's why all of his stories, if you look at these stories, every story, at the essence of it, he brings it back to the nafs, this lower self of yours. Listen, the nafs is like a donkey. The nafs is like a horse. The nafs is like a scorpion. The nafs is like an elephant. The nafs is like a lion. The nafs is like a rabbit. I mean, he has 13 different animals in the Masnavi that he talks about the nafs that shows you how tricky and how dangerous it could be. And in the famous story, the most dangerous of all of them is the rabbit nafs, right, that kills the lion. The point that he's trying to make is know yourself. That don't get tricked by your own self. And that's the big problem, that until we don't get out of our own self and know who we really are. In that beautiful story that in the Masnavi, where the man comes and knocks on the door, and the beloved says, who is it? He said, it is I. He said, go away, there's no room for two eyes in here, right? And then as he goes, and Rumi says he becomes a wanderer, a poor man. And then he tells a whole sad story. He goes in the desert for years. He wanders and he wanders. And what happens? He comes and he knocks on the door. And then he says, one of the things I love about that story, the subtleties of Rumi, the second time that he comes, he said he stands by the door with so much adab, just with courtesy and with beauty before he knocks on the door of the beloved. And he goes, adab is at the essence of this tradition, that if you want to see the beloved, you have to have adab. You have to have that comportment, that gentleness, that beauty. Adab is to put things in their proper places, right? And this is why Rumi starts his book with Bishno, because Bishno, listen, is the adab of learning. Is the art of learning is to listen. That's why he starts with commanding imperative, listen, right? Because from then on, he's going to tell you how to become Insan al-Kamil, what Ustad was talking about, this perfected human being. But next time he comes in, he knocks on the door, and he says, who is it? What does he say? He no longer said, it is I. Because this is fana. This is when he is no longer there. He said, it is you. He says, come in now. Now you can come in, right? And those are the things that a lot of people, many of us growing in the West, this concept is very alien to a lot of young people. What do you mean lower self? What do you mean the nafs? If you don't mind elaborating on this concept of the nafs in the Masnavi, and why is it important that we go back to our tradition? And one of my favorite stories in the Masnavi is the man in Iraq. in Baghdad who goes outside the city to get snow. He said, man, if I can get some snow, how amazing would it be? And he goes to the mountains, and as he's getting the snow out, he sees a dead dragon. He said, whoa, better than snow. If I take this dragon, dead dragon in Iraq, in Baghdad, how much money would I make? I will have show every day. People, nobody has ever seen a dragon. So he puts it on the wheelbarrow and he brings it down into the city of Baghdad. And he goes, come, I have a show for you. I'm going to unveil this amazing creature. And the Khalifa comes and everybody's like the scene in the Gladiator, right? And everybody's there, what does he have? And he unveils it. And everybody's like, oh my God, what is this? This is a dragon. I brought a dead dragon. And Rumi says, oh my friend, the dragon is not dead. It's frozen. He said the problem is the sun of Baghdad is very hot. And as the sun keeps hitting it, the dragon wakes up. And when the dragon wakes up, he eats the man. And he eats all his friends that are around him. And he said, my friend, that dragon is your nafs. You can never kill it. You can hibernate it. But when the son of Baghdad, when that desires come, the right time and the right place, it will wake up. It will destroy you and those who are around you. And he gives one after another stories about the nafs as the central theme of the Masnavi. And I'm glad that he mentioned the story of Moses and Pharaoh, which is the heart of the Masnavi, where Rumi at the end of it says, Musa و Feraidoon در هستی توست. Moses and Pharaoh, they're both inside of you. Go out and seek these two inside of yourself. Like he said, Ustad said, are you the Pharaoh or are you Moses? The concept of nafs.
Well, so the nafs is a very slippery thing. And it's not a light switch. It's not so much that we have an ego and look, now the ego has been dealt with. In some ways, actually, it's the moment at which we think that the nafs, the ego self, has been defeated, that it's become the ultimate trickster. One of the things that many of the mystics say, and this was a controversial statement then and now, is that they actually narrate from the Habib, the Prophet, when he says not that he had killed his nafs, but he says, قَدْ أَسْلَمَ الشَّيْطَانِ. Everyone has a little devil inside. I made mine submit to God. Right? And this notion that even the prophets struggle, have to deal with qualities inside of themselves, far from reducing the prophets, actually gives us a chance to think about ascending with them. I get very suspicious when I hear the language of killing the nafs. I think there's been too much of that in the Sufi tradition. I prefer metaphors like cooking the nafs. Training the nafs. Cooking is great. And of course, what cooks is fire, and fire is love. Right? Nothing disciplines the ego, because the ego is always me. But love compels you to service and care for others. Right? The minute you have projected yourself beyond of your own ego, you've taken a huge step on the path of love. And it's helpful to think about how much can we keep extending it. If your nafs compels you to worship yourself, right? We evolved beyond worshiping wood and stone a long time ago, but worshiping the self is still something that's with us. See people lined up in the streets because they have iPhone 8 and they want iPhone X. And they're the same thing, but just one of them has a rounded corner. Can't get people to show up for prayers, but they will line up behind the Apple store to be the first one to get it. The nafs is always telling you, if you only have this, then you will be whole. Then your life is complete. Right? And I'm not speaking as someone who has risen above this and has solved it all. My very dear beloved knows we all have our nafs pitfalls. Mine happens to be a BMW. The amount of time that I fantasize about a BMW 2 Series, blue color manual stick shift, as God himself would intend for us to drive. Such a hypocrite. Go out there and talk about social justice and liberation of the downtrodden and drive home in my little minivan going, wow, that stick shift BMW must be so nice to drive. Right? So knowing ourselves, knowing where the weaknesses are, and being on guard against them. Right? Maulana says at one point, he's taken this from a Greek story. It's a Diogenes story that he takes and puts it in Sufi verse. A man is walking in the middle of the street, in the middle of a bazaar with a lit torch. And people are like, what are you doing? And he says, As divudad malulam insanam arzust. I'm sick and tired of these two-legged beasts and demons. I need to find me one real human being. And people say to him, a real human being. We've looked, not one to be found here. And Maulana's answer, and the tradition that has come after him, is you either find one or you become one. And so here's the gift of this tradition. Being a full human being, created by Allah with the divine breath, this is already who we are. And we have to become what we already are. Maulana always says, there's a jewel inside you. Attar, the person that he reads and imitates so often, he says, there is a jeweled nature, the fitra, that is hidden inside every breath. In some ways, the Sufi path is not about accumulating more and more and more experiences. It's actually about dropping. It's about dropping illusions and ego attachment. I wrote a little something calling this, imagine a jeweled nature that you have inside you that's covered up in shit. It's the cleansing, it's the washing of this jewel nature until that light shines. But that divine light, that fitra, that primordial nature, is the reason you're already here.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to what we'll started the conversation, the talk tonight about the divine love. And one of the things about the modern time, unfortunately, with the social media and with materialism being everywhere, a lot of time God is out of the picture. Like, what do you mean love God? How do we love God? And where is God in our lives? So, one thing about Maulana, what was beautiful, what the Ustad referred to, is that the story that he mentioned about how he makes God relevant in our day. When you read the Masnavi, what are preaching? And that's one thing I really love about Maulana. In the Fihi Ma Fihi, he said, I don't like the preachers. Because the preachers, they say, if you do good, you go to paradise. And if you do evil, you go to hell. He said, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to do that to people? Why don't you remind them of who they are, and they will behave in a way that is heavenly? Because if they know who they are, and Rumi said, I have done an analysis of you. This is what Rumi says. I have done an analysis of you, and I wanted to know how much you're worth. I wanted to see how much you're worth, oh human being, since you have forgotten your own value, right? He said that, تو به قیمت ورای هر دو جهان چی کنم قدر خود نمیدانی. He said, your value, you're worth more than this world and the next world put together. You're more expensive than the world and paradise put together. How shameful is that? You don't even know your own value, and you're selling yourself cheap. And this is one of at the heart of the Maulana's teaching, is that he honors the human being. There's a beautiful verse. All of the verses are beautiful, but there's a beautiful verse in the Quran that says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. We have ennobled the human being. There's a nobility about the human being. And Maulana Rumi took this verse and put it in a poem. He said, تاج کرمنا بر فرق سرت توق اتیناک آویز برد ای غلامت عقل و تدبیرات هوش چون چنینی خیش را ارزان فروش. He said, God has put the crown of nobility on your head, and He has given you the abundance of good, everything in the heavens and earth for you and for your use. Oh, human being, the intellect, comprehension, imagination, all of this are your slave at your service. And with all of that, you're going to sell yourself cheap. And this is what Maulana Rumi does. He elevates the human being to such a high level that you actually feel ashamed of behaving in any way other than being that perfect human being, being that person, a role model for yourself, for your family first, and for your little community, and then for the society, and then for the world. Not the other way around, to change the world. And as one of the messages of Maulana Rumi is, don't go out and change the world. Don't aim so low. Go out, aim high, and change the universe inside of yourself. Because changing yourself is much harder than changing the world. Because God has put a universe inside of you. And in the beautiful story of the man in the garden who looks at himself, and the man comes and goes, oh, foolish man, what is wrong with you? Look at the garden, look at the roses, look at the trees, look at the fruits, and you're sitting here with your head inside. And the man said, oh, you think I'm a fool? You are a fool. Because those are all just a reflection of what's inside of me. That is a postcard. That is a vista point. The real universe is here in my heart, right? To travel inward. And this is why Rumi, when in his most famous lines of poetry in the Diwan Shams, when Shams left, what did he say? He said, قمر جان صفت در ره دل پیدا شد در ره دل چی لطیف است سفر هیچ مگو. He said, an illuminating moon appeared inside of me. And then I start traveling inward. When you are illuminated, he said, how beautiful is the inward travel, right? People go from city to city, nation to nation, from this land to the other land to meet the sheikh, to meet the guru, to meet the master. And yet that master that's inside of you, you never meet, right? Like in the Fihi Mafi, the beautiful story that Ustad mentioned, the Jesus inside of you, you never give birth. And at the end of that story, one of the things that Maulana says, he said, if you don't give birth to your Jesus, he will leave from that hidden door that he came, and you would never see him. And many people, they never gave birth to their Jesus. And this concept of insan al-kamil, this concept of human being as great creatures of God, that you are not created to kill people, to argue with people, to hate people. You are created to love. You are created for compassion. You are created to bring peace, because you are peace. And what I wanted to throw this at the start is that three things, when you mention Rumi, comes to mind: love, peace, and coexistence. It's just Rumi, those three words, just that's it. That's Rumi's life. In summary of his life, is that's the message, the core message. And this question is for you: why? Why Rumi in those three words? I had a lot of questions that students asked me, so I was saving them to ask him, because I couldn't answer them. So
of course, the Rumi way of answering many questions is to be silent. He ends about a third of his poems with his poetic pen name, which is Khamush, hush, right? The time for words has come to an end. So it would really be a good Rumi thing for me to just hush. And I also want to be respectful and mindful of your times and not keep people beyond the time that they had intended to stay. But since there's also an adab in at least extending the conversation, if not offering answers, when we think about peace, sometimes we define it in a negative way. We define peace as the absence of conflict. And the kind of peace that Maulana pushes us for is a positive peace. It is actually not just the absence of something, the absence of fighting, but the presence of others, the presence of tenderness, of kindness, and that love when it comes to public, which is justice. Maulana is a voice for love. He's also the voice who marches into the court of kings and calls them out when they're being unjust. He's not some brown Santa Claus, right? The peace that he's speaking of, the Mevlevis, this particular Sufi lineage, have prayer books. And the most common prayer of the Mevlevis historically was the one that's so familiar to so many of you, Allahumma anta salam wa minka salam. Our God, you are peace, and peace comes from you. So the peace that he's talking about is not just let us not kill each other, but it's actually let us live together in this life towards Allah in that sense. I think what I would like to do, and with your permission, also wrapping up the evening, is just to share one plea and one last story. The plea, particularly for those of you, those of us who are lifelong students of this beautiful tradition. And I say this as someone who is only perhaps up to his ankles in a vast bottomless ocean. I see, especially among our young people, such a beautiful earnestness in desire, in learning, in respect for our tradition and scholarship, and this brings me joy, immense joy. As you study, as we study the Quran, Hadith, Usul al-Fiqh, Kalam, philosophy, and all of the great Islamic disciplines, don't lose sight of the treasures of love. These treasures do belong to the whole of humanity, but they bear the fragrance of the Prophet. We should know Attar. We should know Sadi. We should know Sana'i. These are the people that Maulana and his community read. If we study the works of the great Imam, Abu Hamid Muhammad al-Ghazali, and we should, you should also know his younger brother, Ahmad. Ahmad writes the first book on radical love in Persian. Maulana himself says, Abu Hamid Muhammad Ghazali was a gigantic soul. He was a mountain of a scholar, but his brother was greater. And he says his brother was greater because all he talked about was intimacy with Allah. Right? We should know Ahmad Ghazali. We should know Ayn al-Qudat al-Hamadani. Right? These are the gems and the jewels of the prophetic path of love that I hope we don't lose sight of. I think the only last thing that I want to share with you before thanking you again for your time, thanking you for your friendship and for your time, is one of the stories that Maulana loved. And it's from an earlier Egyptian teacher, Dhulnoon al-Misri, Zulnoon al-Misri, Zulnoon the Egyptian. And this comes up in the stories of Attar. And it's such a lovely story, and it's so much an example of this path of love. In this, Dhulnoon has a vision of the Day of Judgment, when all of us are going to be present before Allah. And remember, in these stories, everything happens in threes, right? So all of the humanity who has ever been, who is, and shall ever be, are gathered together. And they hear the voice of Allah coming to them, saying, "Who here wishes to be redeemed from hellfire?" Right? He says 9 out of 10 people put up their hands, and they hear the voice of Allah coming to them saying, "It is granted unto you. If you raise your hand, you have my word. You shall be spared hellfire." So they do the happy, happy dance, and they leave. The voice of God comes a second time and says, "Who here wishes to be given my loftiest paradise, a garden that no eye has ever seen before?" 90% of the hands go up again, and a second time they hear the voice of Allah saying, "It is granted unto you. You have the loftiest portion of my garden." So they all leave, and now there's just a handful of people left. And this time the voice of God comes not gently, not softly, but thundering at them. "I offered you salvation from hellfire, and you took it not. I gave you the most luminous of my paradise, and you took it not. What are you here for?" And these handful of people, with that adab, they lower their head in humility, and they say, "We did not come to be spared hellfire, and we did not come for the garden. We came for you." And then they hear the voice of Allah softly coming to them, saying, "In that case, I am yours." This has always been a part of our tradition. The ones who love the gardener more than the garden. There have always been a handful of people for whom salvation is lovely, but the goal is illumination. The goal is to rise and be with God, and to realize that that being with God can begin here. There is a way to walk on this earth. There is a way of speaking with one another. There is a way of touching one another. There's a way of reaching out and lifting up those who are hurting and suffering. That begins that journey of love. May it be that we be blessed to live our life in this world and in all the worlds to come in this way. Amen.
Thank you very much. And what a beautiful way to end the program with that note that Maulana Rumi's teaching is about reconnecting all of us back with the divine, reconnecting back with our Creator, because the love of this world is fani. You know, you don't want to have a love of something that will end, that will expire. You want a love that's eternal. And Rumi's love was eternal. He was not interested in the things of this world. He was not interested in praise of the people, or how many copies of the books I'm going to write is going to sell, or anything of that nature. But he was in love with God. And one of my favorite lines in the Diwan Shams, from the Mawlana Rumi, is when he says, "Ishq zanda, ishq hayy la yamut, ishq murda misla bayt ankabut." He said the love of the living, the real love, is the love of Al-Hayy, which is one of the name of God, the living who never dies. But the love of the ephemeral is like the spider's web. Like the spider's web. What a beautiful analogy. It's gone. It's gone. فرق در مجنون و در من این نگر. کو به لیلا من به مولا در بدر. The difference between Majnoon and me is one thing. Both of us are desperately seeking. He is seeking his Layla, and I'm seeking my Mawla. خاک شد مجنون و هم لیلای او. خاک شد خاکی به خاک وای او. Majnoon and Layla, both of them died, and they become dirt of the earth. And that is what love of this world is. At the end, it becomes dirt of the earth. هر که باشد عاشق مولای من، باشدن در جان من لیلای من. And Rumi said, if you fall in love with my Mawla, with God, then you are my Layla. You become my Layla if you love my Mawla. And this is the message of Rumi, is to go out and become lovers of God, lovers of truth, lovers of peace, lovers of coexistence. But at the essence, find to love yourself. Most people, they don't love themselves. Not their lower self that Ustad talked about, but the essence, the breath of God that is in you. This amazing creature that Allah has created, that God has created with the crown of nobility on our heads. To love that and to become a person who's seeking. And that seeking never stops until we die. It never stopped. Mawlana has never stopped. And his love of God is in the last line of his poetry. On his deathbed, when he was dying, and everybody was around him, and they said, "Oh Mawlana, you're a saint. You're a man of God. You're Insan al-Kamil. Make prayer." We know that if a saint make prayer, God will answer the prayer. Make prayer that you get healing. That you don't leave us, right? We get attached. The students. What did he say? This is the last lines of poetry that he uttered, and he died. He says, "Dard iz ghayr murdan kan ra dawa nabashad. Pas man chigune guyam kin dard ra dawa kun." He said, the pain that I'm going through, this ailment that I have, it has only one cure, and that is death. So how could I ask my Lord to cure me any other way? It's the reconnection, what the Ustad talked about, the inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. We come from God, and our return is back to God. To complete that circle. And he knew where he came from, and he knew where he was going. And the entire book of the Masnavi is a GPS, book of GPS coordinates in order to get you back where you were. Irji'i ila rabbika radiyatan mardiya. Come back to your Lord, the Quran says. Come back. You can't go back to a place if you haven't been there. Come back. And this is what Rumi is saying. This is how you're going to go back. Through this book, he's teaching how to get back to where we came from. And may all of us be seekers of the truth and seekers of love of God. And may we hope to have Ustad with us again in the Bay Area. And we want to thank him for taking the time off his schedule and coming here. And please, a round of applause for Ustad Omid Safir.